Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of The Democratic View. I'm the hostess. My name is Phyllis Italiano, and I have with me today somebody who you all are going to get to know quite well. His name is David Calone, and he is in the Democratic primary for the congressional seat that's presently occupied by the man who beat our beloved Tim Bishop. So welcome, David Calone, and how are you?
Great, Phyllis, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yes. Okay, I usually start the show, and I always tell everybody I modeled myself after Charlie Rose, although I don't see him taking any bows for that, but I'd like to know a little bit about you.
Sure. So I was born here in Suffolk County. My parents met here in eastern Suffolk County. They were teenagers, and their families had come out from Brooklyn. Both sets of my grandparents had moved out, got summer cottages out here on the eastern end of Suffolk County. My grandmother actually was from Sicily. She came through Ellis Island, and my father's family is...
Didn't realize you were a paisano.
Hey, bene. So my father's family is Sicilian and Napolitan, and my mother's family is German and English. They met in Rocky Point. My mom worked at the Carvel, and my dad liked ice cream, and they hit it off. And my sister and I were raised in Brookhaven Township, and I went to Port Jefferson High School. My mom was a school teacher at the Shore and Wading River School District. My dad was an engineer, and we had a middle class upbringing in here in eastern Suffolk County. And
well, they certainly made their way from Carvel's to a teacher and engineer.
Yeah, yep.
The American way, right?
That's it. They were both, I believe, the first in their families to go to college. I loved growing up here. We got to enjoy the wonderful natural environment we have here in eastern Suffolk County, whether it's, we're clamming in the harbors and taking our boat out on Peconic Bay and
yes.
et cetera. So that was a very formative experience for me, was obviously being involved in our the wonderful natural environment we have here in Suffolk County.
So where'd you go to college?
I went to Princeton University. I was in...
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it was interesting going there as a public school kid, but I enjoyed it there, and I got to meet people from all around the country and all around the world, and that was a really eye-opening experience. I had some really great experiences there. I was able to intern at the White House, which was a great experience. I worked for Vice President Al Gore for a summer, working on the Reinventing Government initiative, and that was definitely a lot of incredible experience, as you can imagine, for someone who was 19, 20 years old. So.
All right. Yeah, I went to school in Washington, D.C.
So
Went to American University.
Oh, sure. Great.
So I love Washington. But the problem with Washington is it's too far from the ocean.
Yep. It's good to be here, on Long Island, and that's why my wife and I decided to move back to Long Island eventually.
Where did you go from Washington?
Yeah, so I worked in... After college, I went to law school, and that's where I met my wife.
Where?
We went to Harvard, and one of our first dates was going door to door, knocking on doors for Bill Clinton for president. So I figured she was a good girl for me if that was her idea of a good time. So, but I've been involved in Democratic politics since I was a teenager. My grandfather was a really influential person in my life. He had been involved in politics in the city, and when he retired out here to eastern Suffolk County, when I was growing up here, he would, talk to me about the political process, how important it is to be involved, how important it is to live democratic values of, giving people opportunity and hope and fairness and those kinds of things. And I got involved as a teenager. Actually, I remember I was at Port Jefferson High School, and we were in a government class, and you had to do an internship to get credit. And I said, is it possible for me to work on a political race? And I went to the principal, and he said yes. And so I worked for the Brookhaven Town Democratic Committee. It was the first time I'd ever driven, really, be out of my neighborhood to drive down to the Brookhaven Democratic headquarters. I remember it was the first time I had driven on the expressway at all, and I did that on behalf of our Brookhaven Town Democratic Committee, of candidates for town board and supervisor, and I guess I was 17 years old or so.
Wow.
And then I got the bug there. We lost, and of course back then in particular, this was a really hostile place to be a Democrat. But my grandfather actually drove me to the Board of Elections, the Suffolk County Board of Elections in Yaphank, a few days after my 18th birthday, where I got to register to vote, and he went with me to do that. And I still remember that, doing that with him, because it was a special thing to do with him, because he'd been such an important person in my life, and being interested in government and politics and how we can do good things, working together through government.
Oh, I'm going to try and influence my 8-year-old
There
who
you
lives
go.
out here.
You got someone to influence.
Yeah.
But he was an important person in my life, and I registered as a Democrat there at my 18th birthday, and I've been involved in the party ever since. The next, I remember the summer right after I graduated from high school, so a few months after I registered to vote, the Democratic National Convention was in New York City, and Bill Clinton was the nominee.
Right.
And there was an ad in Newsday or something like that for volunteers for the Democratic Convention. So I answered the ad, and my parents let me go into the city. It was the first time I think I went into the city. Took the Long Island Railroad into the city by myself, and we had to go to the Hilton, and it was on 6th Avenue. I think the ad said, and I was walking around Manhattan. It was my first time in there alone, and I got to 7th Avenue, and then I found Avenue of the Americas, and then 5th Avenue, but I couldn't figure out where 6th Avenue was. I remember being a little confused my first time in the city. I was, again, like 18 years old. But I did find the Hilton. I figured out that 6th Avenue and Avenue of the Americas was the same thing. Yeah. And I reported to the basement of the Hilton, and they had us folding T-shirts down the bottom, getting ready for delegates coming. This was the volunteers were needed a few days before the convention. And I was folding T-shirts, and as my wife will tell you, I may not be the best at folding laundry and doing that kind of stuff, but that was my way of helping. But I'd been there about an hour or so, and someone came into the room and said, does anyone here know how to use a computer? And I had just graduated from high school, so at that time computers weren't that prevalent, but you had them in school particularly. And I said, well, I know how to use a computer, and I figured this was my way out of folding T-shirts. So they said, well, can you come here? And so I did, and they said, we need you to go upstairs because we need someone who uses a computer, and you know how to use a computer. I said, yes, I know how to use a computer. They said, okay, come with us, and they put me on the elevator, and they sent me up to the penthouse. I said, oh, this is interesting. So I got up to the penthouse of the Hilton, which was a 2-story penthouse. And I come out, and they said, the chairman of the party, this was Ron Brown, needs someone who knows how to use a computer to keep lists. And he said, now you can keep a list on a computer, right? I said, yes, you can keep a list on a computer. I can do that for you. And they said, great. So I met the chairman of the Democratic Party, and he said, he had all these credentials, passes to the convention, that he needed to give out on certain days to certain VIPs, but he needed to keep track of it. And so he said, can you keep track of who I've promised these passes, tickets to the convention to on the computer, and then, then when people come, you can give it to them and cross them off. I said, we can do all that on the computer. That'd be just fine. So that's what I did. I did that for about a week, and for I believe it was 4 days of the convention, I was responsible. People would come up to the penthouse.
So did you get to see Bill and Hillary?
So the great thing was the chairman, Mr. Brown, gave me tickets every day to go. So I went from, but it was an amazing experience. I got to meet all Jimmy Carter and Dick Gephardt and all the senators and members of Congress would come up to our penthouse to get their passes, and so I got to meet all these folks, and there I was, 18 years old, and
what an experience! It was
an incredible
for an 18-year-old.
Yeah, and like I said, Chairman Brown gave me a pass every day to go there, and so I was on the floor, probably 100 feet from Bill Clinton, 150 feet from Bill Clinton when he accepted the nomination, and the songs were ringing out, Can't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow, and the balloons were falling and all that.
Right. So what was the next big thing that happened?
Well, I used some of those people I had met and then became a White House intern. So I went to college 2 months later and then became a White House intern. But I've been involved in the Democratic Party, since that time. I've actually attended every Democratic convention since then, one way or the other. So this summer in Philadelphia will be my the 7th convention that I've attended, and wearing various hats and doing various things. But
And so where did you work? You had to earn a living doing this kind of thing.
Yeah. So I
Can't
went.
just go to conventions.
That'd be nice. But so after law school, I went to. I was accepted a position at the Justice Department as a federal prosecutor. They have something called the Honors Program, where they take a handful of people from around the country directly out of law school to become federal prosecutors at the Justice Department. And I did that. I worked on international corporate fraud prosecutions, particularly investigating the oil and gas industry. And so that took me around the world, around the country. Spent a good amount of time in Texas. But it was an amazing experience. I mean, the first day, I remember getting sworn into the bar in New York. And the very first day, I went back to D.C., and the very first day at the Justice Department, they said, head up to Albany. They had me send me to Buffalo. That's right. They sent me up to Buffalo. We need you to deal with the sentencing hearing up there. So head up there and helped someone who needed help with finishing up a case, and it's there where you stand. I stood in court and said, for the first time, my name is David Calone, and I'm here representing the people of the United States of America. And I had a chance to do that day, and then for a number of years in courtrooms around the country, and dealing with foreign governments overseas as well. We worked closely with our allies on various law enforcement actions. After 9/11, so this is before 9/11 when I started the Justice Department. After 9/11, I was one of the youngest folks at the Justice Department who had certain security clearances that you needed to get involved in to help on the terrorism prosecutions. And so I was asked to get involved and work with the intelligence agencies on behalf of the Justice Department, working on the prosecution of some of the Al-Qaeda members who were involved in the plot, the 9/11 plot. So I worked on that for assisting the trial team there for about a year or two. So I did corporate fraud prosecution as well as terrorism work, and it was good to be able to contribute. It was a difficult time in our nation's history, obviously. We've been attacked, and we wanted to hold accountable those who were involved in attacking us, and of course send a message that if you attack us, you'll be pursued to the fullest extent of the law. And I was glad to be able to participate and help in that effort.
Well, these are things I did not know about you, David. Okay, so there you were in New York City, and when did you get back to Long Island?
Yeah, so I was at the Justice Department in Washington for about 4 or so years, and my wife and I had gotten married by that point and decided to want to move back to New York. I had helped Eliot Spitzer on his campaign. I'd been one of the people helping run his campaign for Attorney General on behalf of the state Democratic Party. This was when I was in law school, actually, so it was before I even became a federal prosecutor. And at the time, Eliot was doing a good job of holding accountable corporate abuses and those kinds of things. And I went to him and I said, I'd love to, want to move back to New York and want to help with what you're doing. And he said, we need a lot of help in healthcare fraud. We have, real problems there. And so I went and worked on healthcare fraud for a couple of years as an assistant attorney general in New York State. And
you were the assistant attorney general?
No, I was one of them. There's a bunch, yeah.
Oh.
So I worked with a team of people, and we prosecuted and held accountable a hospital system that was bilking the taxpayers through the healthcare reimbursement system, Medicaid, and we recovered for the taxpayers $70 million, which was at the time the largest healthcare settlement recovery for taxpayers in New York State history.
Wow!
So that was exciting to be part of that.
And when did you get back to Suffolk County?
So we moved back to Suffolk County. My daughter Sarah is 10, and when she was about 6 months old or so and started crawling around, we realized that our little basement apartment in Brooklyn wasn't really going to be enough for us, and so we moved back to Suffolk County. I guess about 9 years ago now. We started looking for places and eventually moved back, and it was great to be back in Suffolk County, and great to now raise my family here. So we have Sarah, who's 10, Peter is now 8, and Meg, our little one, is 4.5, so almost 5. So we
quite a family.
Well, we keep busy. They keep us busy.
I can imagine, I know.
But it's exciting to have them growing up here, where I grew up, and they're enjoying it here. But they've faced different challenges than we did when I was growing up. I mean, our economic pressures are so much more. Of course, it's you never really realize, I think, how much my parents and all the parents here in Suffolk County sacrifice to raise their kids here until you get your first mortgage check yourself, first mortgage bill yourself. You got to write that check, right? When Kate and I moved back here, realized how expensive it is when you get that mortgage bill. And so, first of all, I appreciate my parents' sacrifice, but secondly, I want to make sure that my kids, have a good upbringing here because of, we know it's how expensive a place it is to live and to raise a family.
Now, tell us about your involvement here in East Hampton. I know you were instrumental in something called 555. Would you explain that to our audience?
Yeah, sure. So when I moved back to Suffolk County, I was in touch with our county government, and since I had just left the public sector, being a federal prosecutor and then a state prosecutor, I went to a law firm briefly in the city, and then I started working on a investment fund that became the venture capital fund that I have now that helps invest in startup companies, and we're focusing on starting and building companies, little baby companies, and helping them grow up to become, employers, create jobs and all that. But I wanted to make sure part of what I was doing with my life was being involved in public spirited activities, as I had been done when I was a prosecutor. And so I got in touch with folks who I knew in county government, and I had actually run the county executive race here in Suffolk County in 1999, so I knew a bunch of people who had, were involved in county government. We lost that race. Our Democratic candidate, who I worked for, lost, but I knew a bunch of people from that time, and which was a few years later. I was coming back here to Suffolk County, and I said, what is there a way to be helpful? Is there a way, like a volunteer position that you get involved with? And it turned out there was a vacancy on the Suffolk County Planning Commission. And so I got appointed to the Suffolk County Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission is a great organization because it has representatives from all the townships in Suffolk County, as well as a few at-large positions. But it's people from all different walks of life. And it's set up so that we have to have at least one person who has a labor background, one person who has a development background, one person who has an environmental background, et cetera. So you have all these skill sets represented on the commission. So you get a whole variety of different views. And it usually, because the members span the whole county, you have a variety of political backgrounds. We had, Democrats and Republicans, and, we learned to kind of figure out and reach consensus. So I was on the Planning Commission for 9 years, and after my first year, I became the chair. So I was chair for about 8 years of the Planning Commission. And about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I guess it was, when the Wilkinson administration was leaving East Hampton, and the Cantwell administration was just starting, or about to start, the 555 project came to the Suffolk County Planning Commission. And the 555 project is the old horse farm over on Montauk Highway.
In Amagansett.
In Amagansett, just past the IGA there, as you head out towards the stretch. And there was a proposal by a developer from, I think it was Connecticut or Massachusetts, to buy that property and put in 80 luxury condos. And the Republican board at the time had a majority, and they were about to leave office. I think it was like November or December. And they were leaving office at the end of December, and Larry Cantwell and the new board were taking over with a Democratic majority on January 1st. And they were trying to rush through a change of zone. The old outgoing town board rushed through a change of zone to allow these luxury condominiums to be put in place. And we at the Suffolk County Planning Commission, led by John Whelan, who was now the ZBA chair, but was at the time East Hampton's representative on the Suffolk County Planning Commission, he and I worked together to get the votes on the commission to stop that project. And that allowed the old town board to not be able to make that zone change, allowed Larry and the new town board to come in and say, we're not going to do that, and instead we're going to purchase that property. So now, instead of 80 luxury condos on Montauk Highway, we have a beautiful open space that's owned by the people of the town of East Hampton.
And it is a beautiful space. And as you drive to Montauk and you look to your left, you can see this lovely open space, which is part of what we need to continue to work on, because that's what makes East Hampton East Hampton.
Absolutely. And I think, East Hampton and all of Eastern Suffolk County, it's a special place. We need to preserve that. We need to keep what makes it special, and that is making sure that we're protecting open space, and in particular, we're protecting our waters, because the water under our feet and the water that surround us, they really make us as a place. Nothing's more important.
I could not agree with you more. Water is it. It's the key issue of our time right now, because it's in jeopardy, and we are having a big problem with nitrogen, and we need to make sure that we work on that. And as a matter of fact, tell us why you are running to replace a guy who I, in jest, call Led Zeppelin, but he's really Lee Zeldin. But why are you deciding to throw your hat in the ring to go back to Washington as a congressman?
So, in my role as chair of the Planning Commission, I had a chance to work on the key environmental issues from our region. So that's water quality, that's open space, and that's, in my mind, renewable energy. And been a leader on those things. The 555 property is a great example of the work we've done to protect open space. The water quality, I've been a leader on the county's effort to make that a priority, reduce the nitrogen loading, make sure that we have the kind of protections that we have, distributed wastewater treatment, that we have we call decentralized systems, and for the western part of our county, it's sewers. But for the eastern part of our county, it's more standalone treatment facilities, and making sure that we recognize that the impact on the waters is man-made. We're causing this. We need to solve this problem. And in fact, part of it's education. County Executive Balone and I led what they call a teletown hall, where we were on the phone with 10,000 residents in Suffolk County to educate them about the issues with water, what they individually can do to help protect our waters, and those include things like not putting your pharmaceuticals in the toilet, and what you can do to lower your nitrogen impact in terms of fertilizer and those kinds of things. But also what we need to do as a region, and that includes funding for these, for the mitigation projects we now need to protect places like Fort Pond and other places here in East Hampton. And the East Hampton Town Board, I got to give them a shout out, because they've done a tremendous amount of work in identifying the specific nitrogen loading problems in the township, and then looking at individual solutions. So the solution in downtown Montauk is different than the solutions in other places in the township, as well as the other places on the East End. So for me, it's all about protecting our environment, and I was actually just endorsed by the Long Island Environmental Voters Forum, who looked at my record, who looked at the record of the person I'm running in the primary against, Anna Thronholst, and decided that my record was the best one when it comes to the environment. So I'm honored to have their support. I also want to focus on growing the economy. So for the last 7 or 8 years, my role has been to help get companies started. I've done that around the country. One of the companies that I started was named one of the fastest growing companies in the country by Inc. magazine. But I've helped launch companies here on Long Island as well. We have some great research institutions here, Brookhaven National Lab, Stony Brook University, and others. But I realized that what we weren't doing was helping to create jobs out of that research and out of those institutions. So I created a partnership to help launch companies coming out of that research. And we've been able to launch, over the last 2 years, 10 new companies, help 10 new companies get started out of our research labs. Now, these are all baby companies, and some of them will grow up to be, the companies that will be the larger employers in our area. But every decent-sized company started as a small company. So we need to get more small companies going, and that's what we need to do here on Long Island, on the East End, and elsewhere, to make sure we have the jobs of the future, to make sure that, our middle-class families are able to stay here, to make sure that all kids have an opportunity to have jobs that can afford to live here in this high-cost place.
Mention something about the airport. I know you did recently talked about your the man you will be running against when you become the candidate,
Yep.
and FAA.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, my belief is that the congressman for this area needs to stand up for the local decision making, and that means that we have a community airport. We need to make sure that this local community is the one that can decide what the rules are. And this isn't JFK, this isn't LaGuardia. I understand the FAA has, should care about those places, but this is a community airport. Started as a community airport, should remain a community airport, and should maintain the rules set by the local community. Well, what makes sense? Other places can make their own decisions, but as for this East Hampton Airport, I believe that the East Hampton Town Board needs to be the one to decide. The FAA, we need to push back against the FAA in regard to them getting involved here. Obviously, the two curfews that the town board did pass have been very helpful, I think, in helping to stem the tide a little bit of the airport impact of the helicopters and the noisy aircraft. Hopefully, the court will allow the other regulation that the town board had passed, which was the one with respect to how many times a particular aircraft could land here. But my belief is, as a member of Congress, we need to push back against the FAA being involved at all, help them understand that these are community airports. And quite frankly, if this isn't something they understand, then we need to put legislation in, because whether it's here in East Hampton or whether it's elsewhere, we need to make sure that the FAA treats community airports differently.
Well, we're looking forward to you becoming the candidate, because I know you're going to be very involved in the local issues of our town, which is very important, and Suffolk County.
It's been a pleasure to work with the town of East Hampton. I look forward to representing East Hampton in the Congress.
My money's on you.
Thanks, Phyllis. Nice to be with you.
I know you got the energy to do it, too.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure, really. I'm glad.